Okay, let's talk about what a lot of students feel is the strongest or the most time-consuming part of this course is the vulnerable population papers. And again, this is a group assignment, and I'm going to pause for just a moment and try to give you some advice should you choose to take it. This assignment is a large portion of your grade. And when you do a group assignment, sometimes your best friend is not the person whom you want to have on your team. You cannot have more than 4 people to your group. I realize that we have 50, so that may mean I have a few groups who ask for an extra team member. We'll just take that by request and see how you divide yourselves out. But usually 4 is about the best working size. And you're going to need to have people that are good to work together, that are reliable, that when you come together to work, you're not distracted, you don't sit around and talk or do things like that, because with your management and your community clinical rotations, you're going to have a lot of time commitment that you've got to work around. And so you don't necessarily, all members of your team are not necessarily needing to be in the same clinical rotation. Like you don't have to have everybody in community together at the same time or everybody in management together at the same time. That's not a requirement from me. It might be something you want to consider just because it'll be easier to meet and to work on these things, but that's certainly up to you. So that's another reason why that collaborative learning contract, if you've watched that video and heard that explanation or not yet, that's another reason why I strongly urge you to consider who's going to be your best members of your group. So in this table of contents under vulnerable populations papers, you have the guidelines for this, okay? You are going to identify a vulnerable population in your community. Now, who are or what makes up a vulnerable population? It's someone or a group of people with some type of characteristic that puts them at higher risk of poor health outcomes. So, to give you an example of who a population might be, it might be those with limited vision, those with impaired hearing, or the deaf community. It can also be a population composed of people who are homosexual or members of the LGBTQ population, or those who are going through the transgender process. All of those groups of people have things going on with them that carry the potential of having a poorer health outcome than someone who does not have that characteristic. So you'll know more once I get through the first couple of weeks of lecture, but just kind of be putting that in your mind to be thinking about that. I do want to encourage you that when your group comes together, when you decide the members of your group and you come together to determine or decide who your vulnerable population is going to be, that you try to pick some group that you might have access to. A large portion of this paper is going to be interviewing members of that population or people who work from a professional standpoint with that population. So you need to kind of have some entryway, some connection to that population to help you get those interviews set up. So please note, this paper is a 20-page max, not counting title page references and appendices, using the latest edition, which I believe is the 7th edition of APA. If you write a 25-page paper, when I get to page 20 of your content, not including your title page reference and appendices, I'm done grading. I just can't have people turning in large papers exceeding the maximum in order for me to get them graded in a timely basis. Plus, you need to learn to write concisely to get your points across, and not very elaborately or flowery. or overdue detail. So know that your paper is a 20-page maximum. You will need to identify your community of focus. You need to situate your population in a community. In other words, that community could be Cookeville, Putnam County. It could be your hometown. It could be another county. But you have to put them in a community, and you'll understand why as we go through these parts of this paper. Here's more information about vulnerability if you want to read through these. Here are some examples. Now, I usually have a bunch of people want to do high-risk mothers or infants. We can't have 6 groups doing that, okay? So I'm going to put up a Google Doc that has a column for your vulnerable population and your group members to be put in there. And it's going to be first come, first serve. So just getting that out there. We cannot have a bunch of people doing the same VP, vulnerable population. It tells us why it's important to think about this population, gives you some comparisons and things to think about how what makes them vulnerable and where they live. Now, this assignment outline, if you will note on the assignment outline, this is pretty much giving you the structure of the paper. I encourage you strongly to follow this. Use these as your headings. That will help the structure of your paper. It will make sure you get everything in that needs to be in, and it aids me in grading it that I don't accidentally miss something, okay? So you're going to give a description of who your vulnerable population is, what does it mean to be a member, who belongs to that group normally, your objective information. Remember, objective are facts. It's not what you get by assessment. You're going to use a lot of statistics here. You're going to compare your local, state, or national data and talk about what health disparities, which you'll learn more of that as we get into these first few weeks of lecture, what normally exists in that vulnerable population. As I get a little bit further into the lecture, I will help you understand how you can present some of your statistics in this comparison format. Subjective, remember, is what people say. So this is where you're going to get your interviews. You need to interview 2 to 4 community leaders who work with members of this population. They can be formal and informal leaders. So what does that mean? It means people who have an official title or people who are connected to that community in an unofficial way, okay? And maybe that their occupation doesn't dictate that they are in contact with members of that population. In the appendix, you're going to list your interview question guide. Do not email a list of questions to these people. You need to get used to talking to people and asking questions. So you may have to set that up via Zoom or via some other digital modality of interviewing them, since we are doing how we're doing now with COVID-19. But do not email them a list of questions. So you're going to select 2 to 4 community leaders. You're going to interview 2 to 4 individuals or family members or caregivers who are members of this vulnerable population. Again, put that question guide in your appendix. Please note, as you're writing up this section of the paper, do not put a transcript. You're going to summarize what you learned from them. Now, if they say something really astounding, some statement that you feel like is very noteworthy, sure, you can put that in there. Do not do, I asked this or we asked this and this was the response, okay? It's going to be a summary of the information that you glean from those interviews. Also, you are going to reference those interviews in your reference section, and you can look up in APA how to do that. Please do not list their names. This is a small town. I sometimes figure things out anyway, and I find out things about people I don't want to know about. So put their initials, or you could put their job title, such as a social worker who works with this population. You do not have to get very specific about it. Just give me an idea of who it is that you interviewed. Community observation. This is why you're situating them in a community, because it's important for you to give this information about what's going on around them. What's housing like? What's economics like in that area? Are they able to access food and health care easily? Those are things that are pertinent to your vulnerable population, some more than others. So that's why this is asking for that. Your healthcare policy, and you're going to see some links. I'm going to post those in a few days. I don't want to post them right now because y'all are absorbing so much this week anyway. But you're going to find a bill, a legislative bill that has been passed or is in the process of being passed, that that pertains to your vulnerable population. Okay. And with these links that I'm going to put up, when you go to them to find the bills, they'll help you find these bills or these legislative pieces of health policy, and it can be federal or state. It's going to explain and take you through the bill so you have a better understanding of it, okay? And then you need to include these things as to why this bill is impacting your vulnerable population. Healthcare significance. What does it matter? As healthcare professionals, why does it matter that we need to be attentive to this vulnerable population? Does caring for this vulnerable population and its members, does it impact the healthcare system in some way, such as does it drive up cost or there limited resources for them, etc.? So you're going to address this issue. Government significance, same issue, okay? You're going to also include ethical concerns here. Healthy People 2020 is something that you're going to learn about as we go through the lectures in the first few weeks, and it's a national framework of healthcare objectives for our nation. And you're going to tell me which ones may be helpful for your vulnerable population. Are there any that's applicable? Now, your vulnerable population may not be specifically stated under the Healthy People 2020, but there may be some objectives that could pertain to it, to your population. And then you're going to give me this conclusion, okay? Again, some more instructions there on writing it. This is how it is split up, and how the points are divvied up within this assignment. So if you have any questions, make sure you have those ready for me during our Q&A session on Tuesday.